I'm going to talk to you about a few money laundering cases that I've had some involvement in, and also some of my experiences as a police officer. I got a haircut yesterday, and I can see I'm probably looking more like a police officer now with very short hair than I probably ever have. So as you get a bit older, you tend to cut it a bit shorter so it hides the grey a little bit more. So if during the session, if you've got any questions, please do type them into the chat. Happy to take questions as we're going along. And also then use the chat facility or turn on your mic and ask questions as we're going through. Thank you very much. So just very quickly, an introduction about who I am and a little bit of my background to give you some idea of the motivations that make me as an individual really enjoy financial crime and organised crime so much, really, and also the recovering the proceeds of crime. So I left school originally when I was about 16 years old. I'd probably got about 5 GCSEs, reasonable grades, B's, C's, and went and started work in fish and chips, basically. And when I was 23, having travelled around the local area a little, I bought my own shop in Cambridge, and that was a really interesting time for me. So I was a very young man. Our turnover was about £4,000 to £5,000 a week, and so we, as a very young man, all of a sudden had access to lots of cash, and so very interesting time. And I learnt an awful lot regarding money, cash, about tax, about VAT, about doing accounts, doing my own business accounts, using Excel, which is a spreadsheet that does maths calculations. So really interesting time for me. I was working in Cambridge, and whilst running the fish and chip shop, I became a special constable, which is a voluntary police officer, and you tend to do about 8 hours per week. And again, really interesting job, being in Cambridge city centre on patrol as a volunteer police officer, but with all the powers of a normal police officer. I stopped being a special constable to try and dabble a little bit in politics. So became a Cambridge city councillor, aged about 32, and I served as a councillor until about 36 years old. And then also around that time, studied here at Anglia Ruskin. I did a degree in business and economics. Again, you can see that theme carrying through really around financial, around cash, understanding money, being interested in business. So even at a very young age, a long time I was before I was a police officer, I was engaging in this sort of work. Didn't join the police till I was about 40 years old, until I was 40 years old. And when I was 40, signed up and joined the London Borough of Waltham Forest with the Metropolitan Police. A fantastic time. And served 15 years, and 2 years ago joined Anglia Ruskin University. There's a quick picture of me with some family members, some faces blanked out, and my mum and dad, and that's at Hendon, which is where police officers used to train. And the tall gentleman behind the statue there, that is Sir Robert Peel, the founder of the Metropolitan Police, and about 200 years ago. And there I am standing at his feet, ready to begin my policing career. So what I'd like you to do, if in the chat, is just very quickly, if you could just type in, I think a couple of people have done so already, typed in that they're from Peterborough. But if you can just type into the chat your hometown and your college, just into the chat for me. Thank you very much. That's just to get us used to using the chat, so I can make sure that you've got that facility. And anybody that's just joined, if you could type in where you're from into the chat facility, that'd be fantastic. I think Josh and Nathaniel have already typed in Peterborough and their college. Josh and Nathaniel, if you could just type that in again for me, just so I can see that you're still able to send and receive messages, that'd be fantastic. It's nice to know where people are from, so I can get a gauge of whereabouts perhaps in Peterborough we are. Thank you very much, Josh. Great. So mainly Cambridgeshire. Yeah, thank you, Nathaniel, for retyping that in. I knew where you were from, but again, just good to make sure we're still able to engage and the technology is working well. And Hertfordshire, which is really nice to move outside of Cambridgeshire. Thank you for that, Gutierrez. So just moving back and on to the next slide then. Thanks for your input there. What I'd really like to know is, what job would you like to do? So what's your plans for the future? Is there a career that you're thinking about already? So what I'd like you to do, I don't know if you've used Poll Everywhere before, but if I show you up here on the slide, if you can go to pollev.com here on your devices, you should be able to log in, go to pollev.com, and there'll be a couple of other polls that I can use during the slide. So it's still worthwhile going to that location. Libby, thank you for typing that into the chat and for joining us today. So if you can all go to pollev.com, and when you get there, it's going to ask you to sign in to the username or to join a poll, and you'll find it's Viv Ellis 485. And once you join that, Viv Ellis 485, you'll get the opportunity to answer the question. Tell me what job you'd love to do next. So after college, if you like, have you got any thoughts or any ambitions already to do something cybersecurity? That's really interesting. I'm guessing, Josh, was that yourself or was that Nathaniel? I think it was you, Josh, wasn't it? Something law. Brilliant. Again, some somethings coming up. Fantastic. Maybe there's something, and a police officer and a detective. So if, Lauren, do you know if there's any classes that are with us or if it's all individuals?
I think what we've got with the group today is individuals here. Libby, do let me know if you are with a class, but I think Libby is calling in individually. Thank you very much. So something to do with law, something to do with cybersecurity. So really interesting. And a detective. Fantastic. And that cybersecurity, network analysis, really important in the space that I work in, or that I worked in, around financial crime. And the whole financial technology sector is really, really a buzz at the moment, and a very exciting area. Detective, direct entry detective you can do now. But if you think about joining the police force now, things are changing a little bit and you may need to have a degree. So do please join, bear that in mind. If you've got any questions around that aspect of getting the degree and what you might be doing from whether you'll do that as an apprentice in the police or whether you'll maybe look to go to university. A lot of decisions to make. Well, thank you for your input on that. Oh, I'm just going to go back one slide, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a snapshot of what you've added there, okay, so that I can record that for later. Thank you very much. Let's just paste that into my my notes. Thank you, and sorry for the distraction. So my police career, I joined the police. My shoulder number was 944 JC. That's the JC stands for Waltham Forest, and that's in northeast London. When you first join the police, historically, I joined before you could go straight in as a detective, and I joined in 2005 as a 999. After your training, you go in as a 999 response officer, and that was in London.
you younger people may be a bit more excited about driving around in a police car going at 90 miles an hour through the streets of London. But for me, I looked on that as being a bit too dangerous. So quite quickly, I moved into CID and became a detective constable in 2010. And that's a real specialism. But so too is being a 999 response officer. So they're both the role of police constable. But as a detective constable, you have to do some additional training around managing cases that go to court, around investigation, and around interviewing, around forensics, and about managing evidence related to a crime. So a lot of training to do, but you can now go in straight as a detective and do your training on the job. You could only become a financial investigator as a detective. So again, it's more additional training that you do. Once you've done your detective role, you can move into the financial investigator position. Does anybody know what the National Crime Agency is in the UK? So what is the National Crime Agency? Just pop your answers into the chat. Just see if anyone's heard of it. It's the NCA. It's abbreviated as the NCA. So just if you've got any ideas as to what that is, do let me know. I'll just give you a second to have a thought about that. Doesn't look as though anyone does. So the NCA, the National Crime Agency in the UK, they're the equivalent really of the American FBI. And just to confirm, if you could like my comment to show me that you know what the FBI is, that'd be fantastic. Because that gives you an idea as to what the National Crime Agency do. And so they investigate international crimes, they investigate terrorism offences, and they also investigate crimes and incidents that may have a national impact across the UK. So very similar to the Financial Bureau of Investigation in America. And so they accredited me as a financial investigator, and a lot of my crimes were serious, organised crime. So looking at higher level criminals who are involved in serious offences within the UK, often related obviously with a financial side, such as drugs, money laundering, organised crime, prostitution, and offences such as that. And then I retired 15 years later and joined Anglia Ruskin. So that's in a nutshell my role to being a police officer, and how my career progressed. But what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you just to have a look at what motivates people to become to commit crime. So what do you think? So if you can go to that poll everywhere again, have a look at that and sort of see if you can answer the question. Let me just make sure it's come up on mine. What motivates people to get involved in crime? And if you're able to see that on the questions, do or if there's any problems, if you can't see that question, just let us know in the chat. That'd be fantastic. Are you able to answer that question? Sometimes the poll everywhere moves on. Let's have a quick look. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Desperation. Having a lack of money. That's a really good one. Desperation, disadvantage, and background. Really interesting things. And if you're interested in taking your careers further within law, and it sounds as though you are, this idea about why people become criminals is really important, and you'll get to learn and understand the motivations behind what makes people criminals. And for me, one of the greatest motivations, somebody's mentioned it here, but they're all related, is to do with money. But you've also put in there disadvantaged. So quite often, if you're disadvantaged, if you don't have much money, you see all these people driving flash motor cars, and that life of crime, it may draw you in. You look at what other people have got and you think, yeah, that's the life for me. That's the way for me to go and get easy money. So people's background, desperation. And again, this idea about being desperate and about these strains that people often feel on not having enough to eat, not having what everybody else seems to have, jealousy and things like that. So it's about trying to motivate people. And the main motivation, one of the main motivations around acquisitive crime is money. So I want more money, okay, more status and more power. So what I wanted to look at quickly is some of the criminal cases, okay, that I looked at in my CID career. You start off with things like shoplifting. So these are the more easier investigations, lower level crimes. You have to go and get CCTV. You have to interview suspects, but you're really beginning to cut your teeth and also take people to court. Okay. And you'll see at the top here, I've typed in, this is criminal law cases. And so what I'm talking about here is where people, if they commit an offence, they may go to prison. Okay. They may get a criminal background. And that's what criminal law cases are for. And in a criminal law case, you may know that the court has to decide beyond reasonable doubt. So they have to be about, let's say, 99.9% sure that you have committed that offence. Okay. So if you've been arrested for shoplifting, a court or a jury, if you have a jury trial, they have to be sure to about 99.9% that you've committed that offence. So really sure. And if you were aware of that, just give my 99.9% a thumbs up. Okay, so I know you understand what I mean there. That's really helpful. So burglaries, if I investigate a burglary and my criminals, if I take them to court, I'm taking them to court and I give the court the evidence. All I do as a police officer, my job is to gather the evidence, give it to the court for the court to decide innocent or guilt. Okay, and so it matters not what offences they may be, domestic violence offences. So you can see the level of crimes are going up. We're going from crimes against property, perhaps, to domestic violence, more serious crimes, grievous bodily harms, okay, and possession of firearms. Again, all these offences I've investigated. And grievous bodily harm, if you shoot someone and they don't die, that would be a grievous bodily harm. If you stab someone with a knife and they don't die, it's grievous bodily harm. So serious offences whereby if that person, if the hospital, if the medics weren't able to save their life, it would be a murder investigation. And that would go to a team of officers. Grievous bodily harm, one police officer investigates and is in charge of that whole investigation. Not a team, not a murder squad, just one officer. So if you're thinking about policing, just bear this in mind, okay? And this is really important. And I want you to bear this in mind. Criminal law cases, okay? Beyond reasonable doubt. This is magistrates' courts or Crown Court, okay? Two important courts within the UK. And the cases can be seen within each. Magistrates' court, less serious. Crown Court, often more serious, okay? So just to recap on that, if I can, because this is important when we go forward. Criminal law cases, beyond reasonable doubt. 99% sure. I'm sure you remember that. 99% sure. So the court have to think, yep, I'm pretty certain he's guilty. Okay. Can go to the magistrate's court. You will get a criminal record if you're convicted, and you could go to prison. Okay. So all of those things, magistrate's court, a criminal record, and you could go to prison within criminal law cases. Okay, got another question for you now, if you can. I want you to go to the next poll everywhere question, and I'd like to know, what do you think? What do you think? Does crime pay the bills? Okay, is that a career that people are going to look at and make money out of? Does crime pay the bills? What do you think? Yes or no? And there is no right or wrong answer. Okay, no right or wrong answer. I just like your opinions. Okay, so in your opinion, and it doesn't matter if you're wrong, just give it your best shot. What do you think? Does it pay? Yes or no? Are people motivated to go and commit crime? I'm pretty sure that's just one person at the moment. Let's just see how many responses you've got. Let me just type into the chat. So if you could like my comment, if you've put an answer in. So far we've got one. So I'd really like everybody, just tell me what you think. There's no right or wrong, okay? Give it your best shot, okay? Right or wrong. See how many 3 responses so far, okay? And 100% of people think crime pays. That's amazing. So I've asked the same question to senior ranking police officers, and they tell me no, crime does not pay. Okay, and it's really interesting to see that your views may be different. So crime pays the bills. Does crime pay? And that's why I'm in this business, because I think crime does pay, and actually there's more that the police can do about it. Okay, does anybody know these 2 characters? Type your answers into the chat for me. Anybody know who these 2 people might be? This isn't a clue, by the way. This is where I've got the information from. This is a reference. So does anybody know who these 2 characters are? Type your answers in the chat if you know. Let me just ask you, has anyone heard of Al Capone? If you've heard of him, like my comment. If you haven't, don't like my comment. Al Capone was a mobster. He was like a mafia, criminal crime gang boss in Chicago, an American city, in about 1920, and his offences were all very serious offences. So he was involved in bootlegging, which is illegal alcohol. He was involved in murders. He was involved in corruption, so paying off officials. He was involved in bribery, and he was involved in gambling. All things that were illegal in America back in the day. And so, bearing in mind if that's Al Capone, does anybody know who the other chap is? This gentleman here, rather handsome. I think he looks a little bit like me, but you may disagree. Anyone know who he is? Let me type his name into the chat as well. That's Eliot Ness. And Eliot Ness, does anybody know? If you know who he is, you recognise the name now. So Eliot Ness was the law enforcement officer. He wasn't a police officer. He was law enforcement, so he was a prosecutor in America, and he set out to capture Al Capone. Okay, this mobster, a serious criminal, and Al Capone was estimated to be worth over £1 billion, or yeah, £1 billion. It was dollars in America, but he was estimated to be worth over £1 billion back in the 1920s. So he was one of the first big crime lords that really made a lot of money out of crime in America. Very successful. Now, this chap, you won't know who this chap is, but I'm going to type his name into the chat because it's pretty important that you know who he is. And he's you'll never hear it again, and you'll probably forget. Okay, his name is Frank Wilson. Frank Wilson was an accountant, and he joined Eliot Ness to try and catch Al Capone. Does anyone know what offences they prosecuted Al Capone for? Anybody know what offences they finally caught him for? Give it a guess. Throw an answer into the chat. Of all the terrible crimes he could have committed, what do you think he might have been convicted of? Give me an answer in the chat. Let's see if we can get close. I hope you're not busy Googling. Libby's going to type an answer. This will be interesting. Hopefully you're not all busy Googling Al Capone to see what he was. Well done, Nathaniel. Very impressive. Tax evasion. Unbelievably. So all these criminal offences he'd been committing for many years, and they finally prosecuted him for tax evasion. And that was due to the hard work of Eliot Ness and Frank Wilson and the rest of the team. And Frank Wilson investigated over 2 million documents. They didn't have computers back then. Over 2 million documents, and secured a conviction of Al Capone back in 1931 for 11 years. And he went to prison for 11 years and basically died in prison. Never came out. He got ill and died in prison. So yes, crime pays, and crime and criminals are getting harder to catch. They're getting smarter. They can commit crimes all around the world. And so what we have now is there's a real good chance that you may not catch the criminal. So what we've done now is the law, our government have introduced stronger civil law. Okay, so this isn't criminal law now, this is civil law, and it's called the Proceeds of Crime Act. And what that enables police officers to do is to go and get the money back from criminals. And all they have to do is suspect that the money's the proceeds of crime, and then they can seize that money. Okay, they can then gather evidence, and they can go to court. Once they've gathered enough evidence, they take the case to court for the court to decide still, because the court makes the final decision, is that money the proceeds of crime on the balance of probabilities. Okay, so this was my daily life. This is what the inside of a magistrate's court looks like. As a financial investigator, being in the magistrate's court was my bread and butter. You could seize, and you still can, anything over £1,000, either in a bank account or in cash. And very often individuals were stopped with over £1,000. They might be in a car, but the officer, if he suspected the money was the proceeds of crime, it could be seized if it's over £1,000. Okay, could be in the bank or in cash. It would be a cash seizure if it was cash, and if it's in the bank, police officers can do what's called an account freezing order, where they go to the magistrates, they go to the court, and they say to the court, this is my evidence. I'd like to freeze that bank account and investigate to see whether it's the proceeds of crime. And it's mainly in the magistrates' court. Okay, so mainly magistrates' court. And there's a bench. That's what magistrates' court looks like. So just to recap, this is civil law, okay? Civil law, balance of probability. So how sure do you have to be on the balance of probability? If we're thinking about 100% in criminal cases, what do you think, how sure do you have to be, do you think, in civil cases? What's that? What percentage do you think you need to be? I'm going to type the answer in because we're going to get short of time if I don't. You only have to be 51%. So not very sure at all. So the magistrates make the decision. They decide only on the balance of probability. And when I say balance of probability, you sort of go, you're weighing it up. You go, oh, I don't know. I sort of think it is the proceeds of crime. I'm 51% sure. And if you're 51% sure, the money can get forfeited and taken away from the criminal. Okay, 51%. That's not very sure, is it? So we're not very certain. Only 51%. Very low. Very low. And that tips the balance in the favour of law enforcement. So it could be still in a magistrate's court or in a Crown Court. If your money gets taken off of you, we're only interested in the money. We're not interested in the individual. It's the money that's up in trial, if you like. And do we think that money is the proceeds of crime? And if it is, it'll get forfeited. No criminal record and no prison. And that's what makes it civil. And it's really powerful legislation. So all the court has to decide, 51%, okay? And do like my 51% so I can see you get that. And that is powerful, okay? That is strong. Let me just type into the chat very quickly. What do you think? Do you agree? That's strong civil law? Go and take someone's money off them. Just like my comment if you think that's good. Let's go and get the criminals' money off them. 51%. I like that. Okay. So this is my cousin Ray. He got me into financial crime. Ray was the victim of financial crime, and the criminals basically took about £80,000 off of Ray. They defrauded him in a scam related to buying property. And as you get older, your judgment starts to go a little bit, okay? And your decision making might not be as good as when you were younger. So, and that's what happened to Ray. No fault of his own, okay? His decision making wasn't as good. Then there's this bunch of people here. We've got John Connor here. John Connor and his crew here, his gang, organised crime gang, very scrupulous, awful people who basically defrauded an elderly lady out of all of her money, over £130,000 in cash, and also stole her house. She's got a house in London worth about £400,000, and they conned the lady into signing over that house into their name. Okay, these guys got convicted in 2018, and John Connor here was the ringleader of the gang. He got about 18 months in prison, which was quite a low sentence in my view, but there we go. But never mind, John Connor, there he is again, does the same thing again. Okay, exactly the same offence, exactly the same modus operandi, the same method, and this time value of the fraud about £1.1 million. He goes to prison, and he goes to prison this time for 8 years. I think it was 8.5 years. So hopefully he's still there. That was in 2020. So he committed, the offences were running at the same time. So he committed a further offence. Okay. So with this in mind then, last year, a friend of mine, he's works for the City of London Police, and he took a case to Westminster Magistrates Court, and he secured £29 million. Okay, £29 million. And how sure was the judge? He only needed to be 51%. Imagine that. Imagine you go to court and the judge is only 51% sure that that money is the proceeds of crime, and he seizes and forfeits that money from you. You'd be pretty cheesed off. So the Proceeds of Crime Act is about hitting the criminal where it hurts the most, and that's in their wallet. Okay, so this case was really interesting case. It was the biggest ever cash seizure conducted by the City of London Police, and this is the name of the two companies, a Greek company and Cypriot lawyers, and you can look them up on Google. You can look this up and have a look at the case. It was a civil case. £29 million forfeited from these guys. No criminal conviction. International investigation involving Europol, international law enforcement, and the banks. And they helped secure forfeiture £29.5 million. Okay, amazing. Also last year, the tax man, HMRC, seized 26.5 million pounds. And another job, a man named Rajneesh Garib, he was believed to be an Indian national. Money was seized from him, £29.5 million. Went to the Magistrates Court in Cardiff. The Magistrates Court, again, over 51%, decided, yep, proceeds of crime, and they seized it from him in a civil case. The money was in 5 different bank accounts, but it was alleged that he'd committed fraud by claiming money back on the furlough fraud scheme. You may have parents who've been on leave during furlough fraud, not having to go into work, and so this suspected criminal, he's not a criminal because he's not got a criminal conviction, all of the money that he took from you and me, we're the victims here, the British taxpayer, he's lost all that money. Quite right too. £70 billion has been paid out in furlough money. The tax man estimates £7 billion of that is fraudulent, but they've no idea. It could be more than that. Okay, just got 2 slides to go, nearly there. The total cost of money laundering in the UK is £100 billion per year. That's an estimate by the National Crime Agency. Now, there's so many noughts on that. When I was showing my daughter what £100 billion looked like, there was too many noughts, and she couldn't compute what was going on. There were so many noughts. I think it was about 12 noughts, 10, 11 noughts. It's an awful lot of money. But only £219 million is recovered. Less than, well, a fifth of 1%, 0.2%. That's how much money, £219 million, was taken back from the criminals. Now, it's really interesting to see you guys want to go into law, cybercrime. That's where the future is. Okay, let's go and get the money back off of the criminals. London is a hot spot, a bed of money laundering, and it's the centre of the financial world. So the UK is well known, and Companies House is well known as a place to come and do business if you're a criminal, and a lot of them hide the proceeds of their ill-gotten gains in London or around the UK, in property, in bank accounts, in artwork, in cars, in any assets, in cryptocurrency even, any assets you care to mention, okay? And what I love is actually going and getting the money back from these criminals, because I truly believe it's the one way we can hurt them. It hurts them the most, hurting them in their wallet. I've got no more slides. I've run out of slides. I could talk all day about this subject. I'm passionate about it. You can probably tell. Hopefully you've found that a little bit interesting, okay? There's a lot to talk about and a lot of opportunity in the future. And I'm really interested in and hoping that you find it of interest and can take it forward yourselves. And the expression I like to say is follow the money. So in your future careers in law, if you've got any questions, if you're not sure, just think, where's the money come from? Where's the money come from? Where's the money come from? Okay, keep going after it and finding where's the money come from. Follow the money.